Well, good morning. I am Lauro Olmo. I am an archaeologist, full professor of archaeology at the University of Alcalá, and University World Heritage. And I'm here because I have the honor, for me it's a great pleasure, to introduce Irene Kopelman, a landscape artist and scientist also, that has dedicated her career to develop a long-term commitment to ecological issues and an interest in the parallels between the practice of science and art. And I want to emphasize from an extraordinary process of intellectual curiosity. So, she studied at the School of Arts at the National University of Córdoba, and in 2003, she completed an international residence in the program at the Rijksakademie Wijnveldende Kunsten in Amsterdam. And in 2011, earned a doctorate in fine arts from the Utrecht Graduate School of Visual Art and Design and at the Finnish Academy of Fine Arts. After a first phase of work in museums, mainly natural science museums, in Netherlands, England, and Argentina, subsequently, she became curious about the process of personally confronting the landscape through projects linked to lava fields in the Hawaiian and the Antarctic landscapes. This process led her to become interested in the process that make up this landscape, approaching to understanding then and the analysis of scientific methodologies in a very diverse institutions in Peru, Malaysia, Netherlands, Switzerland, Egypt, France, Spain, Ecuador, among others. The search and the research for different ways of representing the interaction between visual art, drawings, and the environment. The natural landscape make up her constant dialogue that has taken shape in a constellation of proposals that form a coherent whole and, as herself declared, seeking direct contact with things. And a wild process of scientific research varies from one expedition to another. The underlying artistic concern remains the same. Kopelman tries to identify and study what can be represented and translated in drawing. In short, the naturalization of her artistic activity from her understanding and work in labs or with scientific methods builds a socialization of science from her artistic interpretation. Irene, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning. So thanks, Lauro, for the introduction. I think you summarized very well my practice. Thanks, Marta and Rebecca, for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. And thanks, Felipe, for the previous presentation, which I think is going to echo a lot of things that we are going to see in my work, or I think more intuitively in my work. So I'm basically a painter. I'm trained as a painter, and I'm drawing in Argentina, Córdoba, Argentina, that was, not Córdoba, Spain. And so I study in the university painting, and then, as Lauro explained, I got curious about science slowly, and I'm going to explain a little bit how. I'm going to show a lot of images, just that you know it's going to happen. It's going to go, I just talk and let the images flow, so I'm not going to explain everything we see. The first image belonged to a landscape that I grew very close to. This is Córdoba, Argentina, in the countryside. So Córdoba is actually quite a big city, but it's surrounded by very beautiful landscapes. And when I was a student, I used to go to these places. Sorry, I need to keep an eye on the pen. Go to these places, make walks, make drawings. So at that time, I was interested in the landscape as a form, in a way, like connected more to the history of painting, the tradition of landscape painting, and how landscape painting can be today. I mean, that was 20 years ago already anyway. But with the history of conceptual art, minimal art, informed by a lot of avant-garde has happened, like billion things have happen? So how do we look at landscape, even as a form, then? So this is how my work looked, oftentimes. So I would work on site. I spend a lot of time walking, choosing my views, etc., etc. I later moved to the Netherlands, and I kind of was a little bit confronted to the fact that the landscape is not what I thought it was. So the landscape in the Netherlands is completely man-made, it's completely artificial, and you feel it. So you feel it in many ways, but you also feel it in the scale. So in Argentina, landscape is a place where you technically you get lost, and you have to be a bit careful about getting lost, and there are snakes, and so that was landscape for me. Then I moved to the Netherlands, and it took a little bit of time to understand how to work, and what would landscape be for me then, and I couldn't. So what I did was to start working with museums, with natural history museum collections, working with collections of fossils. I'm going to go very quickly through these ones because it's very, very long time ago, just an introduction. This was quite a long-term project. I worked with a geological museum, and I was replicating a collection of holotypes. They call them holotypes. This is the first time that were described as a type. And what I was doing is a handmade replica. So I was observing the pieces and trying to copy them in porcelain. So it's basically the whole collection. It's like 70-something pieces and quite long term. And there is something that Felipe mentioned that for me is very important that has to do with probably the wording will be different and probably wrong, but for me it's some form of embodied knowledge. So there is something that you understand by making, by doing, by observing. So the time that it takes to try to replicate a little fossil of that kind is maybe 3-4 days that you're just basically observing that little thing and try to understand how it is done, how the shape exists. And that's, for me, it's only in the making, and that happens also with drawing and with painting sometimes. So this is another collection. There are microfossils. So I work with a microscope. So this was one of the first projects. Everything is kind of really long-term, involve a lot of engagement, of time, and mainly time, and people also helping me around. This is another collection. It was an entomological collection, so it's massive. So I also always immerse myself in these environments, and I don't know what I'm going to do. So I start kind of browsing and seeing and talking and asking, and eventually I carve my own little trajectory I set up my protocols. So I decided to work with butterflies, which for me had this very interesting aspect that if you look at this, in science they would describe it as one. You would find a schema of these butterflies look like this, but if you start looking and drawing especially, that's not the case. So every wing looks different, every little thing looks different. So maybe the general, there are some features that are shared, many, but it's not the same really. And that comes with me with the time that drawings allows you to spend with your subject. So these were some of the drawing. I decided to draw only one wing. So that's also important to me, that selection process that somehow Felipe was also mentioning. I think what one does with drawing is this selection process. So especially if you come from some form of a minimal practice, I'm always trying to extract something that I think is interesting of the object. So after this project, I started getting curious about going back to the landscape. I was lucky enough to get a grant to go to Antarctic. This is also a very long time ago. Not as long, but maybe, 15 years, I guess. So I got a scholarship to go on a vessel, on a sailing boat, to Antarctic, and I wanted to draw glaciers and icebergs. That was my goal. And for me, the landscape was still this idea of, I was searching for shapes and colors, like very much informed by my curiosity as an artist connected to the history of painting, basically. This is the landscape is, and then all the thinking that comes with it, no? Like how it's nice to want to draw a glacier, but how you draw it is not so easy actually. So it's cold. All those conditions and constrictions for me are very important, and they become part of the work, how you draw in that environment. I'm completely not interested in drawing from pictures, so I'm interested in immersing myself in those environments and trying to cope, and trying to see how all those elements kind of make you draw in a certain way. It's really not the same because you're cold. You have a window of time in which you can actually take that cold. There's rain, there is snow, there is light, there is the boat moves. It always changes, no matter which landscape you are. It's always one constriction or the other. So all those things for me are actually really important. This was in a sunny day, so I could actually have more time to work with watercolors. That's my drawing situation. After this, I somehow started getting curious about how scientists work on the field. So I got a scholarship from the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian had a grant for artists to work with their collections. And they invited me to apply because of my museum kind of trajectory. And I thought it's, for me, not so interesting to go back into a museum collection. So I started searching for stations where people is actually doing science. So I got interested and see, okay, all those butterflies are there, but who collects them, how that process happened, because that wasn't that clear to me. So this was my first time in the Smithsonian. It's called STRI. It's a research center in Panama. It's a Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. And they do billion things, and they have many actually research stations. They have one in the forest, they have more than one in the forest, more than one in the sea. And my first goal, and that was the first time, I was basically following the scientists around and trying to understand how they work in the field, how they collect, what they collect, how they process, how they transform that information, etc. So I was walking through around the island and trying to find things that I thought they were interesting. This is a leaf trap. So they put these traps to see they check the fall from the canopy, what falls in the canopy. So I decided to install my own traps, and I was basically collecting every morning. So I put 3 traps, and I was collecting every morning and taking into the office whatever it had fallen into the traps, and then drawing. So it started to be some form of interaction in between the protocols of the scientists and the protocols of my drawing. This is another. So in this first trip, I basically spotted a lot of things I wanted to work with, and then I slowly managed to go back several times, and I'm actually trying to go back once more. So this was a gentleman, John Christie, working with the crabs. He was working with this violin, the signaling of the crabs, but I got more interested in the patterns that they do in the sea when they eat. So basically, I would go sit in the beach and draw. And the patterns, again, they're always different because it's a reaction of they go back to the burrow. So if they're afraid of something, they start eating, and then if they're afraid of something, they come back. So they create always a different drawing, a different drawing for me. And I had to work with the tides also, because I had to wait until the tide goes down, then they start eating, and then the sea come back and erase the model. So it's always also sort of entangled with the timing of nature, what I can do, in the time that nature's offer. So for me, in a way, the landscape started after a number of years. Now I work in this 2012. So now I'm working in this fashion for like 10 years, 11. And for me, landscape had changed since then, because I started to understand that those forms have a reason in a way. So it's not that you go to a beach and you see the shapes and they look cute, but once you start to understand how the crabs eat and what they do, and so it's all for me, nature is now a process. So So it's not so much a shape anymore. So that for me completely changed the way I look at the landscape when I draw it. And I don't think I can draw anymore without knowing. This is an invasive species. So that they do the studies in the canal, because the Canal of Panama, of course, there's a lot of ships passing by, and they release the ballast water, the water they have in the ships to give weight, and then that releases a lot of a huge ecosystem. So you have all this issue of the invasive species and the way they study technically, so they sink in this little mosaics, sort of, and they let the species grow, and then they pull them out 3 months later, and they count what's invasive, what's native, look at those interactions. And for me, it's also, because I come from drawing, and that's actually my main mission, what these ecological studies offer me is like frames, no? Like when you try to work with nature, it's gigantic, no? So what scientists seem to be very good at is to kind of create smaller problems. And that's for me very interesting, to tackle my own processes. So I basically drew one plate from each side of the continent. And then there is also quite a large part of my practice which has to do with a lot of things I have to learn to work this way. Like, for example, for this, you kind of have to keep your animals alive, or like they're animals. They're very small, but they are animals, and so they have to stay alive for 8 days, which is what it takes me to make a drawing, like especially that one. This was 8 days, so these things had to kind of stay in good shape. So you have to clean them, change the water, put them in oxygen. So there's a lot of things that come with this way of working. These are lianas. So it's a person, Stefan Schnitzer. He works with the ecology of lianas. So again, I went with him to the field a lot, and then eventually I realized how I wanted to work, and I had to take some decisions, which then has to do more with drawing, which is like what to draw, what do I erase, do I draw the rest of the forest or not, do I look the canopy or not, do I draw the roots or not, do I draw the tree from which the lianas are hanging or not. So all those decisions I take at the beginning, and I do a lot of tests, and then when I think I'm happy with it, I just go for it. And then it's quite then I follow my protocols, let's say. Mangroves, also in Panama. This is a station called Bocas del Toro, and I work with a scientist called Andrew Altieri, working with mangroves. And the same, I mean, not the same, but different. So I also a lot of testing going, for example, in the right distance to draw the mangroves. So I tried different creeks. Some were too narrow, so I was too close to my subject. Some were too broad, so I was too far. Also, if the sea is open, it moves too much the boat, so you can't draw. Those kind of things. And then I draw. These are intertidal studies, also Andrew Altieri. So in ecology, they do a lot of these little things. For example, they look in what happened, which life grows in those rocks if you don't do anything to it. Then they do one, what happens if they put shade into it, what happens if they put a cage so they are not predators, and what happens if you have both predators and shade. And then they look. They wait until these things grow, and then they look. So he let me draw those areas, and these are the drawings. So it goes pretty much like that, a lot of my time. These are sponges, so it's the life that under the mangroves. The mangroves, as you probably know, they're huge barriers in the sea ecosystem, so a lot of things can hide there. So I know it's not there, but yeah, for example, you see it here. So a lot of big predators cannot enter, so a lot of little fish and a lot of things happen thanks to that protection. So I work with those sponges that are beautiful that grow there. And this is a series of books I'm working with also for many years. It's called Notes on Representation. So every time I'm able to, not always, I don't always, there's a lot of fundraising in this whole ecology of work. So sometimes I don't manage. But when I can, I do these chapters, which are basically the drawings, many times text from the scientist, and my notes. I write quite a bit. And I work project-based. So I normally start with something and then I go for it, and it takes a lot of time. And oftentimes and every project has a different resolution formally, let's say. So, and the beginning is somehow always similar. I think I'm interested in something. I start to find the people I'm interested, or I find people that work with those regions or those subjects, start talking, start understanding the terrain, and then find slowly my own way of working with it. This is a landscape. This is not landscape, this is my show, but this comes from a landscape in Argentina, which is actually quite beautiful. It's this place. It's called El Cañón del Ocre, in La Rioja. And I was interested in this place because it's yellow on the eye. So I was already I work in Antarctic, which is kind of white. I work also in another place in Argentina called Chihualasto, which is red, in Hawaii, which is black. So I'm also looking at these landscapes that look like one color, but of course, if you get into it, they're not. There's a lot of variation and things. So I work in many things also because of all the fundraising and the speed of this kind of work. I work in many things at the same time. So maybe I'm going to a landscape somewhere, and then it takes me maybe a year to find the funding to go again. So in that time, I'm researching something else, and I'm talking to other people, or making some paintings about something I visited 2 years ago. So there are a lot of many things happening. So this is a landscape. These are the geologists that work in this place. It's yellow because of some acidification process. And it's really amazing, as you can see. That's me again. Quite small. This is really empty. It's really desertic, this place. So I went with them actually twice, and then I went alone. And again, the drawing on site, seeing what's the best position, what's the right distance to the wall. And those are the drawings. So the production comes very much in hand with the conditions. So sometimes, for example, I had it that I fundraised a year to go to Hawaii, and then it rained all the time, for example. So I was like 10 days waiting for the rain to stop, and I came back with like 3 drawings, like ridiculous. But for me, it's okay. I mean, I'm in peace with it, because I think it has to do with I think the lack of efficiency somewhere it's important also in our times. In this place, I made a series of drawings, and I collect a bit of rocks. And then it went to another layer of work which happened in my studio, which is trying to recreate the colors of the landscape. So I was trying to literally replicate. I was not using the powders of the pigments of the rock, but trying to replicate it manually with oil painting. And then it enters these paintings, which are like basically 2 by 2. Then it moved into something a little bit more extreme, which is I saw some form of a puzzle in it. So I thought it was interesting to try to recreate these paintings into a ceramic work. And it entered a completely different part of the process, which was trying to replicate the colors I had in the paintings in ceramic with engobe. I work with the same ceramist also for a billion years. So it's also a whole process of finding the right colors, researching the colors. Then we created a very large tile of ceramic. Then we marked the drawing with this very old technique also It was used in frescoes to create dots on the map. So you transfer your drawing into the clay, and then we cut it, number it, the whole number on the back, and that's actually how the piece look. So it looks quite clean at the end, but the process are quite complex, I would say. And then we recreated which color would go into the parts as in the painting. This is a system of transport. So when you look at an art show that looks all clean, this is all what had happened before. So this piece, to install it, is quite hardcore. So we transport it like this in kind of parcels, and then I have, of course, a map. You have a question? No. And then we kind of transfer by parts. Well, I have a system, but it's actually we showed this piece in Cerezales, and a very good friend of Rebecca was on the floor with me 3 days installing. So this is just showing a range. So I work in many different things and different landscapes. Sometimes I work with laboratories. Sometimes I work with, it doesn't go too far. I mean, it goes either to biology or to geology. And that's more or less it so far. And this is Galicia. This is not Galicia, this is Cerezales, which is in León, but I wanted to bring this project here because it's an area that is a bit familiar for a lot of people here. A curator called Susana González, who directs a foundation called María José Jove. She commissions me to develop a project on the region of Ribeira Sacra. So that's not so much the way I work. Normally I find my own subjects. So normally I go to places I want. But sometimes happen that people think it's interesting that I go somewhere, and then I sometimes do it. And Susana is a great colleague, and we gave it a try. So I went to the region, and Susana helped me finding a geologist, and then I started finding entries. For me, it was a bit of a challenge because as you might have noticed, I'm used to work in more pristine landscapes. So, and this area is really, I mean, there's agriculture, there are roads, there are villages everywhere. So, for me, it was a different experience, which actually turned to be good. This is Victor. He's a geologist we went with. So, it's, in a way, similar process. He showed us around with a little trip. He spotted areas, he explained, unfolded the landscape for me, and then I identified things that I thought they were interesting and I could work with. It's a geological table, just for fun, because I love it. So the first trip, I spotted different aspects of the landscape that I thought they were interesting. One, which is completely human made, which is the issue of the dikes. So for me, because I do come from drawing, for me that line was a drawing. The line that is the difference in between the levels of the dike create this line that doesn't have vegetation anymore. So since the first trip, I was very interested in that line that is kind of goes through the landscape, which you can see there. So in the first trip, I took one of these disgusting tourist boats just to see the thing from the water. And then we had 2 more trips. I took one in a slightly more a smaller boat that was better just to make tests. And then finally, the last time I went with time, and we understood how to work. So we found a tiny company that was willing to, and had the patience, because you have to be with me the whole day in a boat. It's not too much fun. So we found these people that was amazing. So I spent basically a week drawing to both sides of the water. I'm making these drawings that they are very long, and it's ink on paper. And again, a similar process. I collected little rocks, and then in my studio I recreated the colors, which became these paintings. Actually quite large. The place where we display them is huge. Cerezales is like a huge, so everything looks small, but the paintings are, I think, like 4 meters or something. Then I was very interested in something that I've been searching for a long, long time, and I think probably, I don't know here, but in the movie we saw yesterday, these images appear. I've been wanting to draw clouds for a very long time, but very long time. And what happened, I mean, we were looking at other things in the landscape, and then we came across this, which I think in Galicia is quite common, which is the fact that the clouds are kind of stuck under you. So I thought I found my moment to draw it. Then I went back, and again, in a way, the same thing. So I went with many different papers, try watercolors on white paper, just try many things until I found the right technique. And then I thought this is ink, white ink on gray paper. And then there's something I'm very interested in. I don't know how many people here is trained on art history, but there's something you find a lot in, for example, when Birman used to try to draw landscapes, you find these kind of things a lot that he couldn't, you look at those paintings now and you're like, oh, okay, the guy mastered it. But if you look at archives, you find this collaging. So you see an image and then there's a little piece of paper that kind of completes the space. So those kind of problems we have when we people who draw, they seem to be there or have been there for a long time. So I try to bring those things into the process as well. This is the piece that you'll understand in a minute. This is a geological wall that seems to be important because it kind of tells the history of the geological history of the area. Actually, this is where the seal and the Minho meet, exactly in that location. So the geologist explained us billion things, and then I got very interested, and then went again and decided to work with. So I created this map, which is a map that you later see in the wall of the space, and I was painting the areas that were kind of had more features. There are some areas that are kind of boring to draw, because that's also for me important. I mean, for me it's also, I follow my own protocols, but I also follow my intuition about painting or drawing. So if there's something that is really not interesting for me, I just don't do it. Because it's not going to be a good painting, and that's, at the end of the day, also my goal. So I did this series of small paintings on site as a wash on the canvas. And I think this was the last part of it, which I got curious about these shapes. So basically what happened in that region, the landscape is quite abrupt, so it's not that you can go down easy. So you either down, like in the water as I did, or you up. But it's difficult to, it's very, it's just very abrupt, the geography. So what I realized the only way I could look at the landscape was from the viewpoints. And then that gives you a very particular view. So I thought, okay, I either collapse or I'll take it in, so in the process. And I decided to take it in and start looking at the shapes that appear. So what you see in the drawing, probably you saw it already, it's not too difficult, but these shapes that appear kind of cut by the mountains, basically. The intersection of the mountains give these windows on the water. And that's what I was drawing. Quite abstract, but it's there. This is in a nutshell the process. And this is how the green of the sculptures come from this color index. It's used in science for the studies of water, natural water. So with people I work in another project, he told me which color in that scale was in the landscape in the time I was working. And that's a green. that then I try to recreate in the sculptures, which is this. So the sculptures are some form of a reconstruction between the drawings and the studies on water. I want to show two more things. My main goal is the next one, so I'm going to go even quicker through this. This is a project I did in Argentina. I was invited by actually also a Spanish curator who was living in Argentina for a while, Agustín Pérez Rubio. He was directing a museum called Malva, and I left Argentina many years ago, and I'm not from the capital, so I actually never had a career in Buenos Aires, which is where you have to have your career if you're from Argentina. So he was directing a museum, and he said, okay, let's just try to correct a little bit this. And he invited me to to develop a project engaging with landscape in Argentina towards a show in the museum, but he gave me a lot of time, which is also a luxury, which I had also here, like 2 years, 3 years to work. It's very rare in the art world that people give you that kind of space. So what I started doing is to work with different groups. I had no idea where to start, so there is a research institute called CONICET that they do a lot of research in the country. I hope they can continue. I think this is the people who is now going to struggle a lot. So I hooked to them, and then I did a lot of field trips, sort of trying to identify my subject. This is a lovely people that actually it didn't develop because they work with a flower, and that flower is once a year. They were finishing their studies. It's not a place I could access alone, so sometimes it's also happened that I open up something that it cannot continue, and that's also part of it. This is a place I did work after. It's Chihualasto in San Juan. It's super beautiful. I went with actually a team that were geologists and paleontologists. So it was already a little bit interdisciplinary in itself. So I followed them in a trip they were doing anyway, and I was trying to see what I could do. And I found two things that were actually both very interesting for me. One was this, which is a formation. It's called slump, and it's a form that shows that it was sea there many years ago. And it probably was, I mean, now I'm a little bit more used to it, but it's quite a shock when you're in a desert. It's super dry, it's hot, and then they tell you it was sea before. It was the first time I came across that strange feeling of the time in geology. So I wanted to reconstruct this shape. So that was one part of it, and then a series of drawings that I did in the other part of the landscape. So this is just to show a little bit the process and how, all the things that are behind. This is in Puerto Madryn, in the south of Argentina. They're working also with this technique that I already knew, the invasive species. So this was a little bit easier because I already knew the technique, knew what I could find. Of course, the organisms are different, but I already kind of knew what I would find. So this is back to Chihualasto. And this was amazing because these people, the team of the research team, agree in helping me casting that geological form. It was quite something. So I went with a team of the technicians from the team they are used to do casting for paleontology. So they're actually much more used than artists to work on the field, to carry things, to deal with the environment. So we were going up and down every day for a week, and we created molds. So we had to still take it down, actually. So the scale had to be taken into account. So it's really a sculptural process. And this is back to my landscape. That was really interesting for me because it's the landscape I showed you at the beginning. And it's like 20 years later, I started going again with people who were studying the ecological dynamics of the place. So this is what they call it closure in biology. So they close, basically, an area, and then they see what it will happen if they're not predators. So very much like the small things, but in this case, it's larger. These are also ecological studies. So I went a lot with them to the field. They're looking at seeds. Then this is a technique I kept using, I still use a lot, which they use in ecology, which is also like throwing, this is called a quadrant, and they throw it, trying not to decide where it's going to fall, and then they do a lot of counting, and they try not to have a decision upon what they're going to study, so they just throw it away, and then they turn and they say, okay, it fell there, let's count how many, whatever they're looking at. So many of these things I work with, I work with that quadrant to create the drawings. And these are studies of roots also connected to invasive species, how the invasive species take a lot of water, how it kind of kills sort of the native species. This is also quite a long time ago. And this is what they call in science mesocosm. And what I did was to create in the museum the little portions of the ecosystems I work with. So again, I work with a team of the CONICET, with a technician in biology, and then we brought earth from those areas, a little bit of plants, and we created a garden, basically. So that was the show. Again, very clean. Nothing happened there. That's how it looks, the paintings. And we show in that big glass the process. That was a little bit new for me. The curator was very keen on letting people know a little bit also the background. So we show all the notes I do in the field, some stones, some things that we found. These are the water samples, the invasive species. So that's how the show looked at the end. The paintings. I show even the index. The drawings. So these are the root drawings. The ones. This is also in Córdoba as well. These are gadgets they use in biology, in marine studies, to mimic nature and to see which insects start living there or don't start living there. And a lot of my notebooks. These also enter a book, this one, in this case. I'm sorry, I didn't know I put so many images of this. But I want to reach here. So this is the last thing I want to show you. It means a drawing camp. And I want to show it close to the other one because it's a project that for me was very important, but and I would love to keep doing it, but I think the success of this project is connected to the fact that I knew the landscape very well from the one I just showed before. So when I was working already in the research for the project in Malma, there was a prize roaming around about the environment and art and environment. So I decided it was quite a lot of money, so I didn't see the point in using it for my own project. I just truly didn't see the point. So what I decided to do is to propose a project which was a drawing camp. So it was to create a drawing station in the landscape, using the knowledge I already had in drawing, because that's my field, and then all my network with scientists, I was working in the region already. So what we did was every day someone would come from the researchers, and they would explore one aspect of the landscape, and then I would articulate drawing exercises for people to understand it through drawing. And it was really amazing. So I had a production team, and then we were basically camping all the time, and people could come and camp with us. and join 1 day or 2 days, and we had days with schools. And it was really, and I was very interested to work with things that were really small, so that the landscape was not really not looking at birds or things that are just very physically present, but more to look at the processes, like lichens, or what happened with the litter in relation to the earth, or what happened with the fungi or ants, like things that people don't think about. I mean, you don't think it matters, but it actually really matters, and it creates the environment where we live. Also, not only, of course. So this is the person who works with the soil in relation with the leaves. So we had a lot of people. The project took a month altogether, and it was really amazing for everyone. So these people work with the flowers, with the systemics of flower, and then they were doing some beautiful exercises. For example, they explain a flower, and then they would tell people, let's try to go and find it. And all these things of perception are really actually very interesting there, because people, if you don't know what you're searching, you don't find it. And also with scientists, for example, we were mainly artists. So for example, say you go and search for a black something, and for us it was not black. I mean, because if you're an artist, the nuances in between a black and a purple, I don't know, sepia, it's a very different thing. So we had all these strange conversations that were actually super enriching for everyone. So it was mainly people from Córdoba with different teams. This girl also works with the soil, but we work also with the ecology, with someone who works with fires. Like yesterday we saw a movie connected to the ecology of fires. In Córdoba we had also huge, we have a lot of problems with fire. But there is also an ecology of fire that is actually had to happen or used to have to happen. So there's also people looking into that. This person works with fungi. These girls work with invasive species. And at the end of the day, we were basically gathering, looking at the drawings, and everyone agreed on leaving one drawing, and we did a little publication after, and a show. And for me, it was very important that everyone drew. Like, it doesn't matter if people knew how to draw, if they think they knew how to draw, if they draw for the first time, or if you're a scientist, or whatever you are. I cannot believe in the agency of drawing as a tool for thinking, so for me, it doesn't matter which training you have. It's not about making things look good or look as they are, but more into making a process of looking and observing and trying to create that synopsis in your head that happens for me only with drawing, for me personally. We brought also astronomers, because these kids were camping with us 2 nights, and then so we had a night they were explaining it was beautiful. It was really crazy. Not to be done too many times in your life, but it was quite. They were very sweet. So I think I will. Yeah, I think we can leave it at this. Thanks so much for your attention.